Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. My name is Kat Killian. I'm glad to be here today with you. Um, if you're a frequent viewer of the show, you know that I usually talk about different kinds of biases and talk about how we can see them in things that are currently happening and how the steps that we can take to avoid them. So today I want to talk about the blind spot bias. And this is a really good one because I myself find that I can easily fall trap to that bias um, all the time. We all have biases, okay? It doesn't matter how smart you are, how educated you are, we all have biases. Sometimes biases are what helps us kind of navigate the world and our perception of it and the way that we interact with it. But it is important, I think, to understand what biases are and to have this critical thinking point of view. So let me briefly explain what the book blind spot bias is. It's a tendency to see biases in others, cognitive biases, whatever kind of bias, and we've talked about a lot of them in others, while imagining ourselves to be bias free. And again, I can really fall into that trap. Doing this kind of self examination, I think I'm rational and logical, and I may think that others are irrational and biased, especially if I disagree with them on things. And that's not to say that, well, okay, because I'm biased, I'm wrong, or because you're biased, you're wrong. What that's saying is that um, the way that we tend to think of the world. If somebody doesn't agree with us, they must be wrong. They must be biased. They must not be looking at things rational or logically. And so, recognizing this in someone else, um, in our recognizing that we have biases against other people, and then recognizing that and saying, "Hmm, so you may be right." It's being open to that consideration that if we're going to fight against the blind spot bias, hmm, you may be right, and give them an opportunity to explain their point of view and to have a conversation about it. If these things are unchecked and we don't give into it, they can really distort the view of reality. And it prevents us from making good decisions, and most importantly, I think it helps us in or prevents us from maintaining good relationships, and and doing that, because if we are so entrenched in our own bias and we think the other person is wrong, we don't allow the space for them to be right. We don't allow ourselves the space to entertain their point of view. um, I know this in particular when I have to come to make a decision and I'm going through a process and I think I've happened upon the right answer. And if it involves just me, that's fine. And I might go through and it may be the right answer in the moment, or something may go awry, and then I have to reevaluate that. But that's based on the experience, and that's how I can adjust that bias. But when we're talking about things, a lot of the different debates that are going on in our society today, oftentimes people have, um, what do I want to say? They don't check that. They go into their little bubble and they evaluate the things in their bubble. Meaning, if I am on the left, I'm going to watch CNN and read the HuffPost and other sources that will reinforce my own bias. On the other, and the same thing happens if you're more right wing. So if we're looking at these biases that we have, and especially as they come into interpersonal relationships, how we navigate those things, I think someone else is right, I think you're wrong. And if I'm feeling some kind of distress in that relationship, with that person, especially if we're trying to come to an understanding, or even if we're not trying to come to an understanding, but that misunderstanding or that uh, leaning into that bias, I am right, you are wrong. As I said, I am rational and logical, you are irrational and illogical and biased. We're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to be able to come and meet. So the first thing is to recognize I may have a blind spot bias. So if I'm going there, I have to take a step back from that bias and I have to say, what is the other person or other people? What is their point of view? Where are they coming from? Why do they believe that? And hopefully, if I'm having a good relationship with somebody, they will also allow that for me. That's the only way that we can heal those kinds of relationships when we have that bias and avoid conflict. Um, the other aspect where I've really found this kind of cognitive bias, this blind spot bias, is in evaluations. It's been a while. I've had to supervise people, and I have tried to be very rational and logical when I have had to do evaluations. There have been people I've worked with who I've not been very fond with, and I'm sure they weren't very fond of me either, but I tried to approach it in that rational, logical kind of sense. And um, sometimes they would have the tendency to overestimate or inaccurately evaluate their abilities and their contributions in relation to an overall kind of matrix. And usually, in that case, I would attribute it to my own failure to, or maybe my lack of effectively communicating what those responsibilities are. So I may have that idea in my head and think, well, everybody should know this. If I don't, they're being irrational, they're being biased, they're not aware of it. And so oftentimes we have to come back to that. And it's very difficult to navigate those waters when you have to give constructive criticism to somebody who needs improvement in an employment opportunity, and it's a disparity of relationship. There's an unequal distribution. Obviously, if I'm a supervisor and I'm the one doing the evaluation, I'm the one in a power position, and so in that case, I really have to be more aware of bias in order to be able to give an effective evaluation to that person. Um, but if that person is still leaning into their bias and they have that kind of they're not evaluating their abilities correctly, they're kind of ignoring, and this happens a lot, not just in this employment situation, but in other situations too, ignoring the experts. And I will tell you this: experts sometimes get it wrong. Um, we don't always have it, and it's always good to question. It's always good to ask the questions. But if I'm not an expert in, uh, let's just take out unfortunate is an unfortunate circumstance that's been happening, submarines. Who am I to say that things didn't go well, and these people were wrong and incorrect in going on the submarine, and there was some kind of error uh, made in making the submarine and the way that it was propelled and all that kind of stuff. I'm not an expert. I have no idea. And I know very honestly, I know very little about this. So, I could start making judgments. Well, why would these people go on this expedition? Didn't they do their due diligence on that? I don't do that when I'm flying a plane, or I don't fly planes when I'm going on a flight. I don't assume that. However, I do rely on the experts. So, from my understanding, and if anyone's watching this and I am incorrect in my supposition here, please correct me on this. Help to get rid of my own bias. Um, you know, they should have done their due diligence. This was kind of a very new technology, and we don't know where it's going to go. Where airplane travel is a fairly safe mode of transportation. Are there accidents? Absolutely. Does it happen? Yes. I could take, but that's life. We're all in this kind of, um, anything could happen. I could go out in my car and have an accident. I could step outside my door and trip and fall and hit my head on the pavement. God forbid that happens. But overall, airplane travel is very safe. I don't have to do the research into whether or not it is safe. Enough research has been done by experts. There has been enough study of it done to show that this is a very safe mode of transportation and reliable and things like that. So I can feel comfortable going in that. To go into on a submarine trip in this relatively new technology, I don't know that I would feel very comfortable doing that. And I'm not blaming anybody, but it's the asking of the questions, if we're going to do something or suppose something. So if I'm right, so if I'm the person creating some kind of thing to do, and I'm saying people, oh yeah, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe. Well, I might believe that based on my expertise on it, but I have not necessarily defaulted to other people's expertise or other people's questions. And I should be able to answer those questions. And I should be able to provide data to, you know, counter anything that people say, well, that might not work. I don't think that's going to work. Where are they basing that from? Probably when the Wright brothers and the other pioneers of aviation were doing it, people thought it would never work. But those were people who didn't have any kind of expertise, and those were people who didn't have any kind of understanding beyond what they know. Well, if a plane is heavier, how is it going to fly? Well, you have to understand aerodynamics and you have to understand propulsion and all that kind of stuff. And again, another area I'm not an expert in, but I know enough to know there are many things that I don't know. And I think that's the real trick of getting past the blind spot bias. There are things that we don't know. All the time in politics, politicians will spout off facts and say as if this is the truth. Well, it's always a good idea to fact check those kinds of things. Is that always true? Is this really true? Let's look at the data. What does it tell us? And a lot of data has been thrown out about the coronavirus and the efficacy of the viruses. A lot of things are being thrown out concerning gun violence and what is the leading cause of death in children. And you might get the absolute fact wrong, but when you actually look at the data more closely and give it a more nuanced approach, you could say, well, yes, you are correct. Let me clarify this. And that's the danger in saying things are absolute, without presenting the facts. This is a fact that wearing masks helped curb the spread of coronavirus. Well, did it? As we're coming around to research, there's starting to be some research done at maybe it did initially and maybe it didn't afterwards. Again, not an expert in it. I'd have to look that up, so I don't want to claim that. But people are often on one side or the other. Yes, the mask work. We needed to mask, and some people are still masking. And I don't know what those reasons are. It may be for other kinds of illnesses, especially if they're immunocompromised. And therein lies the nuance. Well, yes, for a normal, healthy person, maybe, well, now we don't wear masks anymore. I mean, I was in the hospital yesterday and didn't have to wear a mask. However, the workers were wearing masks. Um, and maybe because of the large amount of people that they're in contact with, and in hospital settings, sick people, they may wear those masks to protect themselves or to protect the sick people if they may have something. Um, so again, deferring to the experts on those things and understanding the nuances of those things is very important. So it's being able to say, I have a blind spot here. I just don't know. Let me look into that. Or let me say, based on my understanding of the issue, this is the fact. The other thing that's really important, I think, concerning blind spot bias and understanding that you have it yourself and understanding that others also have that is to, if you want to have healthy interactions with people, is to have that understanding that they may have that bias and have a measure of goodwill. If people are stating facts as they understand them, um, they may very well be coming from a good place. Now, I will say this: not everybody is in that way, and especially when we're in these little media silos. Oftentimes, those silos are just basically echo chambers for the same kinds of things that we hear all the time. So it is important to understand also where you're getting your information from and who is saying it and is in what context and what is their motivation. Between two human beings, people who I have relationships with on a personal level, I'm going to assume that those people have goodwill and they're coming at it and hopefully trying to understand, or perhaps shout out their anger of some kind of injustice or something that they feel is going on or some kind of danger, and look at where that is coming from rather than saying, I have a political agenda in order to get votes, money. I'm trying to manipulate people, because that happens quite a bit these days in media, both on the left and on the right. And so that's why it's really important, I think, to look at these biases and to say, what do I know? But more importantly, are there things that I do not know? And if you can acknowledge that there are things I don't know, because I cannot be an expert in everything. So I cannot know everything about this. I don't have an agenda so that's the other thing about experts. If an expert has an agenda, where is that? So they're looking for their agenda. So right there's a bias there. That's a blind spot. They're not looking for truth. They're looking to confirm their own supposition. They're looking to confirm their own bias. So these things are real important. We all have blind spots. It does, again, to reiterate, it doesn't matter how educated we are, how smart we are, and how, what we perceive of other people. We are all fall prey to it. So and I'm saying this to myself first and foremost, if I can keep that in mind when I interact with other people or react to what other people say and do, how can we come together and look past those biases and learn from each other, um, in order to improve our understanding, but B, most importantly, to get along with each other. So thank you for tuning in today. As always, I welcome comments and questions in the chat, and I look forward to seeing you next week for a new topic on Breaking the Lens of Bias. Kat Killian out. Bye.